dental implants is one of the highest searched keywords, like dentist and then it's dental implants. Why? Because people are doing a ton of research trying to figure out, can I get this care? There's hundreds and hundreds of people every single day on each website and going, yeah, I get it. You got the dental implants, but I've already been through the ringer once. All right, we are live. I think this is episode number 5 of Dental Riffs with myself, Gary Bird, and I am a CEO of a dental marketing company. And I'm with my friend here, Tanner. Tanner, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yep, Tanner Applegate with Unify. We are passionate about solving workflows and simplifying those across multiple different softwares.
That's cool. I like that. Did you just, is that your new tagline?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say it's a tagline, but I've been working on it, the messaging of what we do for a long time. And we've been on the DL, which I guess is going public. So it's DL to the public, but we're applying for Y Combinator. So we've been working a lot on messaging for Y Combinator, which is awesome.
What's Y Combinator?
Y Combinator is probably the most prestigious new startup incubator, right? Ooh. So companies like Airbnb have gone through it, et cetera. And so you give a piece of equity to the company and they connect you with this big network. They do a lot of teaching and experts and stuff with other founders and stuff. So it's really kind of prestigious, but it's like harder to get into than even like Harvard or something, right? So the fact that we're applying does not mean anything. It's just we're excited still to be applying. At least.
No, it makes you level up your game across the board, right? Like you really have to think through why you're doing what you're doing and how you're tackling it. How have things been going so far for you?
Good. I mean, like I said, the messaging has been one thing that I've been struggling with for a while, of like communicating what we do in a quick, concise way. And I think that we're getting a lot of handling on that. I really feel passionate about that idea of, you know what, workflows suck when you have a ton of different softwares you have to interact with. And so Unify is all about how do we simplify that workflow for the end user? And that comes in a lot of different fashions and versions, right? It's making sure that you can easily access one from another. It's automating it where it can be or should be automated, but then it's also like you've got a broken piece in your workflow. Let's go help you find a new software to make sure that that's easier and simple for you. So I don't know. It's exciting. Awesome. We're really excited about it.
Hey, before we go any further in the show, I need you to visit a website for me, dentalmarketingmanager.com. If you're a dental office that has somebody managing some of your marketing internally, it's so important that you get them trained. And right now, there is no standard. There is no set of KPIs that people use to build out this position. And so it's been a little bit like the Wild Wild West, but we're aiming to change that. On December 8th and 9th of 2022, we are going to be hosting the first ever dental marketing boot camp. And we're going to be covering everything that there is to know about being a marketing manager, all the KPIs, how to partner with a marketing vendor, how to build out a position, how to get more patient referrals, 2023 plan calendared out, and everything that you're going to need to manage your dental marketing. And this is not something that you're going to want to miss if you are a marketing manager, and you're not going to want to have your team miss this if you have somebody helping you internally with your marketing. So we hope that you will come. A lot of the SMC clients are going to be there. And if you don't work with SMC, that's totally fine. We still want you there. We want to help you. We want to help your businesses grow. So go check us out, dentalmarketingmanager.com. We have limited space, limited opportunities, and we hope to see you there. That's great. So we got some exciting things to go over today. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go? How do you want to do this?
Well, I recently ran across it was released in March. Actually, let me share screen on this because I think it'd be cool to talk through. It's the dentist workforce statistics put on by the ADA. All right, so Let me share this. So I don't know if you've seen this yet or not, Gary. This is the March version. So it was data up until 2020. There's a whole bunch of this stuff that's just fascinating to me that I could love to talk through. One of the ones that I want to start off with because of your marketing background is this whole dentist to population ratio, right? So what it's saying is 61 is the average in the United States. And then all these different states obviously have a different variance. I'm in Colorado right now, so it's higher than average. We have 68 dentists per 100,000.
Yeah.
Right. And so you go and look at these places like Washington and California and New York, et cetera. I'm sitting there relating this data to the conversations that I've had recently with peers that are like, oh my gosh, my payroll costs are astronomical. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's because you're like the third highest like dentist to population ratio. Right. So I just thought this whole thing was fascinating, and how a lot of these ones down here, like, why are they so low? Right. Is it because maybe the population just doesn't go and visit the dentist, and that way the demand's lower? Or is it because of other factors like dentists don't want to live there and that's why it's lower? It's just kind of, it's a fascinating graph. There's going a million directions.
Yeah, there's dental IQ, which is usually related to, there's like an income correlation there. And then there's where dentists want to live, plays a big one. I'm shocked that Florida is that low because it feels like there's a lot of dentists there, but I know that they also artificially keep people out. You have to like apply to get to move there. That's different. Now Arizona's interesting to me as well, because like Phoenix and those areas are loaded with dentists. I know that the statistics are way off on that, because there's you just go do a Google search and check for yourself, where probably the whole state is not that way though. Right. So there's these concentrated areas. New York's probably similar to that, but in the opposite end. So it's like New York, the city, super competitive. You get outside of New York, you go into upstate New York, it's not as competitive, or at least it doesn't feel as competitive from a marketing perspective. So there's some of that going on too, where it's like you might have cities that are tipping things one way or the other. So I find that pretty interesting. Now, from a marketing perspective, my favorite places, if you said, Gary, pick a state that you would want to market in, it's going to be all these high green states. Those are the best places to be, because that's where the population of people are. So where there's more people, and as long as there's enough people to Google search for the dentist, those are the places we like to go to, because that is where you're going to have the best opportunity to drive up new patients. You just have to figure out how to market better. And again, I'm a marketing company, so this is how my brain works. How do we separate ourselves from the pack of the other people marketing? And as long as you do that, then you always win in those states. There's always more opportunity. There's always more new patients. And where it gets really difficult for us as a marketing company is in some of these states where there's not people. If there's not people, it doesn't matter if you're the best marketer in the world. You're not going to be able to get the volume that some people need and want. And so that plays into it from my mindset big time.
Interesting. And I wonder too, if when you get into like these orange states, or even I guess the lower blue states too, if they don't have as much of a demand for marketing, right? Because of the fact that like, hey, I'm not as competitive in my geographical area because I don't have as many dentists in my area, right? And so when that competitive nature goes down, therefore the demand to go out and actually actively reach out to your patients goes down too, because they'll come naturally to them more.
Yeah, I think it plays on both sides. Yeah, that's true on both ends of the stick, for sure. I'm looking at North Carolina. I know has tons of dentists, right? So if you go into Raleigh, it's hyper competitive. That might be one of the most competitive markets I've ever seen. Is like that Raleigh, Duke, North Carolina, NC State, that kind of area. If you know, like watch college sports, that little triangle there, hyper competitive. There's so many dentists there. If you do a Google search there, you'll see just stacks and stacks.
I would love to
dentists.
see the same graph by city instead of by state.
Yep. Yeah, because that makes a huge difference. Because if you go out in these rural areas, to your point, you don't have to compete. You just have to be there. You have to be available, and you get all of a sudden, instead of marketing from a 3-mile radius, you're marketing at a 25-mile radius or a 40-mile radius, and you're kind of just getting all that business because there's not a lot of dentists out there, and that's going to really tip the scales on a map like that.
Yeah, look at this one though. This is where how much of it has changed in the last decade, right? So from 2010 to 2020, right? This is a point in time for 2020. This is the change. right? So you got states again like Colorado that's pretty stagnant. The number of dentists per population has stayed the same, right? Same thing with like Washington, California. But then you have places like Texas and
It's
even North
exploding.
Carolina, like you just brought up, that have been exploding.
Yeah. And okay, so for those that are listening audio only, what we have here is a map. And so if you come and check us out on YouTube, if you can't see this, because you really have to see this map. And I think it's really valuable information, especially planning for the future. If I was a dentist, I would want to know this information.
Right.
But yeah, so Texas,
and we'll link it out too.
Yeah, we'll drop the link to it in the YouTube video as well as on the podcast player. So okay, but look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is growing. So this is gonna, and then Maine. So the top growing states are North Carolina, Maine, Wisconsin, and Texas. I understand California being stagnant because it's expensive to move here. California is one. New York City, and then like Southern California are some of the and Bay Area are some of the hardest areas to move into because your cost of living just goes up so much. Taxes go up so much that it makes it really easy not to decide to move there, right? Like
Right.
from a business standpoint. But some of these other ones, I'm really curious, and New Mexico is really interesting too.
Yeah.
I would never guess New Mexico grew by 10%.
I'm curious to see how much this correlates to with DSOs, right? In the last decade, North Carolina's become open to DSOs where it previously wasn't.
And then
Right.
Texas has really lenient laws on, or they're more friendly towards pedo Medicaid, I've heard.
Well,
Like
they've
as far as,
also been a nightmare to pedo Medicaid in the past, right? Yeah, but
Yeah.
through some, yeah.
But I've heard recently that someone was telling me, and I may be totally wrong on this. So if I'm wrong on this, please let us know. But that Texas is one of the bigger payout. They have some of the bigger payouts for certain treatments for pedo Medicaid, which makes it more business friendly to be there as a pedo Medicaid dentist. So that would make sense because then all these pedo Medicaid offices have to be recruiting and driving into Texas dentists that potentially wouldn't have never chose to move there otherwise.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and
so
I've seen that same thing having grown up in New Mexico myself, right? 2010 versus now, as I go to New Mexico, I see a huge increase in fluctuation in DSOs where there previously would have been no access to care, right? These DSOs are now coming in with their models where they bring access to care to these smaller areas where I could see that being an influence on why they've increased versus like Colorado, where a decade ago, Colorado was still already had a huge DSO influence.
Yeah, so where the DSO influences have already been hit first, which would be the lower hanging fruit markets like California, like Colorado, like Arizona, like Washington. Those are kind of even. Those markets are even. Now, what are the biggest losers of dentists? What states are the biggest losers?
The biggest losers ranging from Vermont at 0.2% and then Idaho at negative 8.7%. So Idaho's the biggest. Utah is interesting to me at 6.8%. Right. And what's even interesting to me is like if you correlate the graph above at 48 for Oklahoma, they've even lost, right? So they're going down even farther from where it was previously.
What's the correlation between Idaho, Utah, and Oklahoma? Those are the three biggest losers with over 3-4%. Why? I have no idea why they would be not.
My guess is obviously being a Mormon myself, I know that these areas are very heavily influenced by Mormons. Okay. Dentist historically has been a kind of go-to Mormon work that I don't think it's surprising that there is a lot of dentists to population just because it's a good job for Mormon people. But I think that the decrease in it, my guess would be like, and again, this is completely a guess, is that the population has outpaced the new amount of dentists moving into the area. Because those areas have exploded, especially during the COVID, right? Idaho and Utah's population just exploded.
Yep. Yeah. A lot of people from California and the West Coast moving out there. Okay. That makes sense. It's interesting.
Yeah. A lot of what it is another 10 from now, because I think that population growth exploded, but it is definitely slowed. I'm interested to see if it fills back in.
Yeah. These kind of graphs are cool, but I think they're very limited in the fact that it creates more questions than
Mhm.
answers. That from, okay, well, let's look at this by city. Let's look at this by the percent of population growth. There's a lot of questions here that leave the door open for
Yeah.
more information.
Yep. But you nailed it, though. I think that this type of stuff is essential to know if you're thinking about, should I start a DSO, right? Like, okay, well, compare it out to your geographical area. Like, is it a good place for a DSO or not? Right? Are you
Yep.
growing? Are you shrinking? Because what this does is it doesn't say green light, red light. It's really kind of like
Mm.
recognize the skill set that you need before you get started. Are you going to need to hire and recruit associates to your area more, or are you going to need to
Mm.
master your marketing more, et cetera?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I love that. And I think there's I always tell people, if you can figure out, if you know an area really well, like we both grew up in certain areas and we saw as neighborhoods started to expand and we saw where there was like no grocery stores, no any services in those areas as they expanded, and we could sit there and look at it because we were familiar with the area and go, man, that would be really good for someone to drop a grocery store right there. It would be really good for somebody to drop a dental office right there because I could
Right.
see how they're going to expand the neighborhood that way. And there's going to be thousands of people of opportunity, even in the most competitive areas. That's happening right now. And I look at these areas on a map every once in a while. Somebody will, show me where they're thinking about putting an office or buying an office, and they start explaining that area in that way. And if you can get on the front end of a developing area as a dentist, it's huge. You almost don't need marketing in some of those cases. So just really knowing and understanding the areas, to me, is huge, because that's what gives you a leg up on. So people say, well, DSOs, or I'm a single location, or I'm a group, I can't compete. Well, you really can compete, because you can be hyper focused on one area where a bigger group with 100 practices simply cannot go through and do that as easily. And yes, they can hire people to help, but then a lot of times they're hiring people from other states. They have to go in and learn those markets, where you can make a decision in 5 minutes and capitalize on opportunity.
Yeah, the difference, I mean, the difficulty in those two situations, though, too, is that the timeline associated with it, right? Like, obviously, both of those, an individual practice or a DSO, they want that timeline to come to fruition right away. But if you're one of the first developments to drop a dental office in a new growth area, but that growth doesn't actually come to fruition for the next like six
Oh, you're
years or
toast.
so,
Yeah.
can you have the cash flow for that 6 years in order to be able to make sure that you stay solvent to experience that explosion?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So timing is really important, and understanding it.
Yeah.
Again, I think that goes back to understanding the area and watching. If you've watched the house tracks go up for the last 6 months or the last couple of years, and seeing how the speed of it going up, and nobody's taking advantage of that opportunity, it makes a huge difference to having no idea what's going on in the area. Did you have any other ones you wanted to cover?
No, I mean, let's jump over something that you've got.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about these whitening offices. I had a podcast about a month ago, and I was going over. This is when I first learned about them. I didn't even know they were a thing. Where these offices were doing $1 million a year, over $1 million a year. All they were doing was whitenings and cleanings, and it was owned by, I believe it was owned by a hygienist that started it, and they're doing over $1 million a year. They opened up multiple of them. They really only do like whitening, cleanings, and I think that's it. There might have been like a couple other like services that they provided, but those were the main two, and they were insanely profitable.
Hmm.
I was really intrigued by this because of the ability to be competitive on this, and it's really just, it's an insurance play, right? It's being able to say, hey, I have um we're here, we'll service you, and then the insurance pays the bill on it. So it's a very predictable, steady income or revenue, very, very consistent. And it kind of fends off competitors. Now, people would say, well, there's less of the upside because you don't have all these other services that you can provide. But I think it's more profitable down on the lower side. I'm wondering, and before we hopped on, I mentioned it to you. You said there's been people who've tried to start these before and have kind of struck out. Is this the future, or is this just something that people have done before, and it's just kind of a trend that will fade away like other things?
Well, that's a great question. I think let's talk through kind of my ideas of the barriers to this being successful, right? First and foremost, in a regular dental office, one of the biggest barriers you face is just hygienists in general, right? So for this model to work, it's a it's a quantity of patients, right? Like you just have to pump patients through. Hygienists are always hypersensitive about the quantity of patients that they're seeing, that now all of a sudden you have to master the culture of like, hey, this is better for you, this is better for patient, and we want to have a ton of hygienists come and work for them, right? Whether that's like an upside on how much you pay them or how you pay them, et cetera. I think being a hygienist and having that experience as you're building this for other hygienists could be extremely powerful. But I think recognizing that, okay, the access to hygiene is going to be one of those barriers that you have to master. That's something that first and foremost you have to get. And so I think then that second one is that quantity of patient flow, right? Like there's, you can't put this in like a retail shop. I mean, in a strip mall, like you would a regular dental office, because almost it relies on like foot traffic, right? Like I'm going to stop in, I'm going to get it while I'm out there, almost kind of like the mall version, even though we all know malls are kind of decreasing in their foot traffic the way they used to. Yep. Right. So then the question is, how do you get it in front of patients just to get enough of a patient flow? Okay. I heard somebody saying, what if we did this in a airport? Right. And I thought that was a decent idea, because people are always like, man, I wish I had time to go get my cleanings.
Okay, yeah, were you the one that was telling me about the psychology of in the airports?
I don't think it was me. No.
Okay. So this is really cool. So in airports, I was watching a show and they were talking about the psychology of fear and being comfort. And when we're fearful, we don't buy things. And when we're comfortable, then we do buy things. And there's like a transition period between that. So as you go through security, there's like this heightened level of fear or anxiety that's created both by the security process and then also by I might miss my plane, right? And there's that, right. We never know if we have enough time or not. There's no gauge to it. It's all done mentally in your head, right? And so you always have to be like, am I going to make it through security in time to get to my airport before it boards, and all those kind of things, right? And so what they do when you come out of that, they instantly put you into a state of comfort by, you come right off of tile. They always put you on carpet, and then always to your right and your left, there will be like food right there in these stores with way overpriced stuff. I mean, $10 waters and $15 hamburgers and things like that. And we like to reward ourselves when we've made it through a level of anxiety. So these airports are set up to capitalize on that. And I think going further into that, yeah, if it's like I can improve the way that I look right now, either by a cleaning or a whitening, I would think that would do great in an airport.
Yeah, so that would be interesting. Obviously, you'd have to manage the whole logistics, and I've always thought this is so fascinating. Of like, as an employee of a airport, right? You don't park at the airport. You have to shuttle then to the airport. You have to do all these things, and so I'm always curious. Like, okay, do these airport businesses pay for this transportation time, or do you clock in right when you get there? Right? Because if you're paying from the moment you park, that's a whole other thing that you got to take into consideration with like hygienists, right? That additional hour of them not working is a very costly hour, especially if you're paying a flat rate instead of like a percentage of stuff. So that's always fascinating to me. And then
what about like in a Walmart? What if someone like Walmart has done things like this before, where they're like, okay, this makes sense to put this particular medical procedure into our Walmart or into a Target or say something like that? Would that work, do you think, if they put something like this in one of those?
I'd be curious to see kind of what the stats are on time sensitive ones, right? Like, yes, I can go in and get my COVID shot, but I think it's going to take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? Whereas with a cleaning, if it's going to take me 45 minutes, am I less inclined to do it because of the quantity of time that's required from it?
Oh, got it. Okay.
Right. I'd be interested to see that. And, but it could be something like maybe putting it in conjunction with a gym, right? I'm there, I'm working out. I care about my appearance. I care about how I feel. maybe tacking on an additional 45 minutes is something that I'm capable of doing right now for the elevated feeling that I get afterwards as well.
Okay, so let's say we figure this out. Let's say we go, okay, we figured out how to open these up. We figured out how to acquire the patient for next to nothing. We figured out that the patients are happy to do it, or the insurance will pay for it.
Okay.
What how would that impact the dental industry as a whole? Like with these, let's say these are everywhere now, they're in every city, and it becomes normal that the hygiene is done separately from the dental procedures. Would the hygienist notice things and then punt to the dental offices?
Well, they already have that right now. Like if you look at Colorado, Colorado is one of the states that is more favorable towards this flexible hygiene model, right? So hygienists can go out and literally travel and do all these things where they kind of like pre-diagnose and then kick it to a dentist, and the dentist has to come in and go and do the thing, right? And so I'd imagine it's the exact same. But the good thing is that there is no like kickback fee of like, oh, this person got a crown, so therefore we'll pay you more, right? Like there can't be any of that, which is great. And so I think that does make that relationship, hopefully, ideally favorable for the patient and for both the provider dentist and the provider hygienist, because you don't want the hygienist to be like, oh, we'll watch this forever, don't go see a dentist, just because then we don't want you to not come back to us.
Yeah, because
right?
the dental office would have hygienists there more than likely, right? So, yeah, I mean, they're not going to just stop doing hygiene because their patients need it as well. So then, yeah, I could see how the hygienist would be sensitive to referring that patient out to an office with hygiene. I know a lot of offices that I talk to from a marketing perspective. I've talked to 3 or 4 of these in the last month. I'm seeing more and more of it. The hub and spoke model where we do specialty here. We have, oral surgery, and then we have 4 or 5 GP offices, all separately branded, that refer into that. But we separately brand the oral surgery, so that way we still get other referrals from people in town. So I know dentists are still sensitive to that. I imagine that hygienists would be as well.
Totally. I think that would probably be, in my guess, would be the best option would be, and I think I mentioned this to you earlier. In a different episode, I had a cousin who's an optometrist, and the optometrist that he worked for, it was owned by an ophthalmologist who owned like 6 other ones. And he just rotated and did his ophthalmology his ophthalmology surgeries at each one of these. Right. And so maybe
so for the listeners, and I asked you last time, for the listeners, you have somebody who does the eye exams, and then you have somebody else who's doing the eye surgeries.
Correct. Yep. The LASIK surgeries are ophthalmology. Optometry is just the exam and getting kind of your RX. And so I could see that being the same for hygienists, right, and dentists, right? So it could even still be owned by a hygienist, own 6 different hygiene exams, but then they contract out with specific dentists, or maybe even specialists that travel around to do just those exams in their own clinics, so that there's no worry of referring out and losing them.
I think we'd end up in the same place that we're at right now, right? So these hygiene offices or whitening offices would be like, if we kept all this treatment in our office, if we brought in a dentist, right? Like we'd probably end up in the same position that we're at right now. That's what I was trying to understand. Like how this seems like going the opposite direction of the consolidation, where it's like now where everybody's trying to bring everything in, they're specializing out. That's interesting.
I think that what this does different though for the industry is it just takes it to the convenience of the consumer even higher.
Yeah.
Right. Which can only be beneficial for the industry of saying, hey, we will meet you where you're at for the most important part, which is at least the cleanings. It's the diagnostics and the preventative. Right. But then when you do have something above and beyond that, sorry, you're going to be inconvenienced by having to go into this other location.
That makes sense. Okay. I got another one for you. So I recently did a podcast with Overjet.
Okay.
And this goes back to what we talked about last week, which I have several people who want to come on and talk about this topic and that we were aiming for. And so, so talked with Overjet, and Overjet was presented to me, the way I understood it was they can now do things to help hold dentists accountable, right? So this is this software that, finds things that maybe were missed, but also you can set it up in such a way that it prevents people from over treating, but it also removes the DSO or the business side of we just need more crowns, more fillings, crank them out, right? Which is, I get both sides of that. And to your point, what you talked about last week was, hey Gary, well, the software does whatever we set it to do. So you can set it to be way over treating, or you can set it to be way under treating. Wherever you set those benchmarks, that's what the software is going to flag for you, which I totally get. But now there's at least some kind of benchmarking. So I posted this online, and I kind of broke it down the way I understood it. And I had some dentist online that actually commented on it and brought up a lot of the good points that you brought up last week. And I asked him, hey, are you willing to come on and talk about this? And he said yes. So I have two dentists now that are willing to kind of talk through this, but I am still a little shaky on like how I would have that conversation with him, because I understand it in such a just a basic way. So I would love to again just hash through that again, just so I understand it. Why why would this? How would this be a bad thing? Like how could somebody like how in the long run is this not going to work out and be a good thing?
I think it goes back to that paradigm shift that we talked about last time, right? Of like, okay, where is your paradigm of like what's acceptable and what's not acceptable? Okay, and every dentist, depending on their influence, depending on the school they went to, depending on a million different factors, has a paradigm of what is ethical and what is not ethical, and says, okay, like these are where my bounds are. Okay. And so I think that the AI in general, what it does is it tries to say, okay, here are the ethical bounds. But I think what's going to happen is these dentists that maybe they're more conservative, maybe they're more aggressive, right? Like they're going to end up disagreeing with this bound set by AI. But I think that it also depends really on the clinical standards set by the group or individual office itself, where they have those standards set, right? So maybe we say, okay, let's make sure that we're always looking at presenting this treatment when you see this type of diagnostic issue, right? And so if you're saying there's like an always or standard, there's a million different factors in that presentation of what I should present that the AI may never actually fully understand. So if the AI is saying, hey, this is what it should have been in these situations, right? Now I think that what the dentists are getting concerned about are, well, there's a lot of other factors that the AI can't take into consideration when they're saying this is what should have been recommended.
Got it. So here's what he said. This is what the dentist said on the post. So he said, what happens if the dentists who prioritize revenue over patient care are the ones who develop the algorithms in use? And it's like, okay, that's kind of what your point is. How do we know that the original clinicians who wrote the algorithms actually know how to identify the best practices, which reduce the volume of treatment needed, even in revenue, isn't the driving factor? So that's an interesting point as well. So there's like almost maintenance, preventative maintenance things that are coming into play there from a clinical standpoint. And this is what he said: as a dentist, there are no widely accepted standards to be able to investigate the outcomes of other dentists. Without seeing the clinical utilization reports from the developers, we have no way to ensure AI actually provides better outcomes than the top 5% of dentists operating regardless of the business structure. This is something that is also occurring outside of dentistry and is yet to be addressed from a peer reviewed perspective. I have a bit of a deeper insight in this area as I am working on a master's of health science degree, and my thesis concept is based around the objective qualification of dental disease, which doesn't yet exist and isn't widely used in the profession. So obviously this guy is like, he knows what he's talking about, right? And
Right.
so I want to bring him on. I just want to know, cool, I'm going to bring these people on, but I need your help. So I'm like way out of my depth on being able to talk through this, but he said he would come on. So I actually tagged you on that on Facebook.
I think from a peer review perspective, he brings up an interesting point. And obviously, peer review has become like the gold standard for research and science across every kind of scientific industry, right? And so his request is, hey, why isn't AI being peer reviewed? And I think it's too early for peer review to happen. But I think that what could be an equivalent of peer reviewing is literally just getting it into the hands of more and more dentists.
Yeah.
Where is the general majority agreeing with the diagnostics that are coming out of this or not?
And I think a lot of times too, we want the perfect answer, but there is no perfect answer, but there's a band that is created that here's the ballpark of the perfect answer. And that, I think that's a lot better than where we're at right now, where you have the spectrum and nobody's wrong and nobody's right. You know what I mean? Like where it's just kind of the wild, wild west. I think if we could get a band at each level for each treatment of something in this spectrum is clinically acceptable and ethical, I think would be huge.
My favorite is like if you talk to a DSO and you say, hey, like what does your compliance program look like? And they're like, oh, well, we pay this dental assistant to pull one chart every month from each one of our clinicians, and we put it in front of our board. And I'm like, okay, well, like statistically, that doesn't seem like a very good compliance standard, because it's literally one patient out of all of the thousands of patients that this provider's seen, but it's literally better than the alternative, which is nothing. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that this AI raises that standard up even higher, where it's like, okay, at least we're able to say every single patient, how do you compare to a standard, even if that standard has yet to be finalized
Fully
and
developed. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And then then the review would be anybody who falls outside of that band, we then want to look at it. We want to review it and see and ask, why did it fall outside of that? And I think that's right now you would have no idea. Like you just wouldn't even know that it even happened or anything. So I think that's so I think we're on the right track as far as technology goes. I think now clinicians need to come in and support the technology to get to the next level. Is that right? Am I thinking through that correctly?
I think so. And I think that speaking up about it as well, right? Like you can come in and use the technology and realize, okay, this isn't accurate. I don't agree with it. It's not in my paradigm. Dropping off and not actually helping support improve that technology is not going to benefit anybody. Right. But if you don't agree with it for X, Y, and Z reason, speaking up and articulating why you don't agree with it and actually being active in it, that's what's going to benefit the industry more so than just staying quiet.
Exactly. So I posted this thing, and this is the dentist that commented on it. I have tons of dentists and tons of people in the dental industry that follow me. He was the only one that spoke up, but he's obviously educated himself on the subject, and so but yeah, if everybody doesn't speak up, then yeah, it's not going to get to where it needs to be or where it deserves to be for the patient and for the doctors and the industry as a whole. That's really cool. So I have another topic. Which one do you have left?
I along the same lines of the conversation that we just had about like the data and statistics and stuff. One of the biggest increases or changes was that there is a huge, it's something like 15 or 20% decrease in the last decade of like individual practice ownership. And that's always a fun topic to go down of like, okay, what does that look like for the industry and how does that go? But it's also one that's been had a lot. So if you have something exciting, like let's
I have
for
one.
sure chat through that.
Okay, so here's where I think the future is for patient care. So we always talk about, okay, so the dental offices want people who can afford treatment, right? So that's usually where marketing starts, is who has the finances to be able to afford this treatment. Unless it's the underserved or these, dental deserts, then people go in and those are approached from a Medicaid standpoint and say, okay, we're going to serve this area. But then there's this like middle group in between those two groups. And I don't know how big it is. And I've tried to kind of identify it by talking to a couple financing folks, but there's this middle group who they're not Medicaid patients, so they're not going to be able to have that insurance that pays for the procedures that they need, but they also don't have $10,000 of disposable income, and they don't have 700 credit scores. They're somewhere in between those two camps, right? And so they don't have like the reserve credit card, but they're not Medicaid, somewhere in there. So I think that there's a lot of those people that are floating out there that need serious dental work, but they just don't come into the dental offices because they know they don't qualify for financing, because the typical financing in a dental office is, a paper. But now that's starting to shift, and there's starting to be more and more people who will support down to like 500 credit score, and they're starting to grade these differently because they realize that it's different, like having a credit card to go buy just things that you may not need versus having a medical debt that it has a small payment on it for your overall health is going to be taken care of in a different way. So they're figuring out how to score these differently. Here's where it gets interesting. I think that we're going to be able to, with that, and when I say we, I mean the company that I'm the CEO over, what we're working towards is trying to get these patients to a landing page. Do you qualify for XYZ treatment? Yes. Okay, great. You need a dental implant or you need whatever procedure. That's great. You qualify for that from a clinical perspective, right? You have that actual need. Now, cool. Let's get you scheduled. Boom. And would you like to qualify for financing before you come in?
Okay.
And then the reason that this hasn't happened before, because I've looked at it before, was I'm not going to have the office lose half of their opportunities because they don't have a 750 credit score. But if these different credit options that are starting to come out are approving at 85% or whatever the marker is, 92% is some high number like that, most people are getting a yes, then that is something that now the marketing team can work on more so than the operational team. So when the patient is coming through, not only do you know why they're coming in, but you know that they have the finances to afford it. And I think this serves that middle market that's underserved, where you have the people up at the top and then at the bottom, but this is more towards the middle bottom that isn't being touched right now.
So what does that ideal demographic look like? I mean, it's not rural, right? It's not out in the middle of nowhere where everyone's going to based off of Medicaid. It's not downtown in these upper middle class neighborhoods. You're saying kind of lower middle class, upper lower class type of neighborhoods.
Yep.
Talk to me about patient flow for those dentists. And is it a already high flow office where you're wanting to go in and kind of like hone in on that patient flow of those that can financially like be willing to commit to it before they even come in?
Well, here's the thing is that, you know how people always say, hey, the dental industry has a lot more room to grow because only like 40% or 45% of people go to the dentist regularly.
Right.
I think this is just another big chunk of that. And then I also know that a lot of people, especially for dental implants is one of the highest searched keywords. It's right out like dentist and then it's dental implants. Why? Because people are doing a ton of research trying to figure out, can I get this care? And then there's just a ton of, there's hundreds and hundreds of people every single day on each website that are going to these sites and going, yeah, I get it. You got the dental implants, but I've already been through the ringer once. I've already gone through that ringer where I got disqualified when I came in and I can't afford it. I don't have the credit card. I just think there's this middle, and again, this is my gut. I don't know for sure, but this is what I'm leaning towards on understanding the market, that there are only about half of people going to the dentist. Who else isn't going? Well, this would be a big segment of that, which is all it'll do. It's not so much what kind of office needs this. It's more how, the way I'm looking at it is what this is the other 20% of the market, 15%, 20% of the market that's not going to the dentist right now. And then if you could get their teeth back to normal status, then you can probably talk to them about, cool, now make sure that you get your teeth cleaned every 6 months and get them into that regular hygiene cycle and really serve a market that just isn't reachable right now.
Interesting. How far along are you guys with this?
We've had several talks with multiple financing companies, and we understand how to logistically make it happen now. Now it's just beta testing it with certain offices that have good feedback loops, so that way we actually understand what's happening on the flip side. Because I'll play devil's advocate, and this was my initial concern, because it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to sell ice cream, and how many people want my ice cream, and then how many customers do we need to get to service that ice cream shop so you can make a profit. It's another thing when you are servicing a dental office and you are now interjecting new kinds of patients into that dental office that they're not used to dealing with. And you're also interjecting financing much earlier in the process. Probably a better example than an ice cream shop would be like Tesla. What did Tesla do? They came out and said, oh, no, we're going to touchless delivery of cars. So you actually buy cars from them without ever talking or interacting with the human. You wake up, it's like Christmas, and you have a Tesla in front of your house.
Right.
Which is it's a totally different way of delivering a product to the end user that looking at the existing model would seem impossible, but it wasn't impossible. But there were some things, but there was a lot of things that had to go right to make that possible, including the product that you're delivering. You couldn't just Honda like couldn't come out tomorrow, like pretend Honda didn't exist. Honda, the next Honda, and here we're gonna do seamless delivery or touchless delivery. Well,
It's now table stakes.
yeah, exactly. It's not big enough. Like I'd be like, nah, I need to see that. I don't. It's cool. It's a Honda. It's cool. I like it. I like all the features in it. But I'm not gonna go through and buy that off the shelf without even knowing. So there's adding finances in there like that. It totally shifts the paradigm from the patient's perspective and really from the office perspective, because if they end up showing up, it should be a slam dunk as far as getting them to say yes. They've already committed to it. So it changes that the mindset there from both sides.
I guess my operational brain like goes directly into, okay, what are the potential risks or barriers with it? And my mind is right now with new patients, what's the current risk is always showing up anyways, right? And then where do we have the biggest attrition for patients? Well, it's whenever we start getting finance involved anyway, right? So if we combine those two together, it's probably going to increase the attrition of those new patients even more, but maybe it's to the benefit because we're not spending costs on something that may not result.
You're not spending operational bandwidth on them because you have to. So each time that someone calls in with implant questions, you having to answer those and then getting into that finance conversation and then scheduling them and then them no showing because they're embarrassed. That's operational bandwidth that you just had to use that you could have used towards something else. So that would eliminate that completely.
So now, though, when you schedule, they apply, even if they do get qualified, I guess as long as you're in that process before they even sign up, that you've communicated the potential value cost, right? I could see that being a barrier of like, all of a sudden they're surprised with this $5, $10, $25,000 cost that even no matter how much they're approved for it already, they're still going to shy away from it if it was a new surprise to them, right? But if you've
that's where the financing,
before they sign up.
So financing does that. So once you're approved for $5,000, right? So then now it's like, okay, how do you want to pay for that $5,000? Do you want to pay over the next 3 months? Do you want to pay over the next 3 years? Do you want to interest free? They have in the financing apps, they have that all set up already. So you're understanding what your cost is on that $5,000 before you go in. And then the dental office knows, cool, we got $5,000 to help this person get the treatment done, get them established into the office, get everything squared away. It's basically like having some, it's like when a patient comes in and they have a certain insurance and the insurance says, we'll take care of this and we'll do this. And then the patient kind of goes, well, whatever their insurance says, you're going to have something like that with the financing it's working from a different angle, but from a mental standpoint, it's going to be very similar for the patient. I'll do whatever the financing is. I already know I can afford the payments on that. And then the office is left figuring out, okay, here's what we think is most crucial for you to take care of now with that $5,000. And then in a couple months or, however long out, then we're going to start tackling these other problems for you. And now you have a patient though, and you got that treatment in. And so, and again, I think that's where it really starts servicing somebody who's not able to get serviced right now.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see, continue to hear updates on this as you roll it out. When are you hoping to get that started with a feedback office?
The next month or two. It just depends on the offices. It's always, there's so many nuances in making, because basically we could launch it and kind of get an idea of it and then just tell the office, here's some patients that are qualified, but it wouldn't be a true, we wouldn't actually learn much from it from that perspective. Right. So it's getting an office operationally up to speed to be able to handle something like that. So hopefully in the next couple of months.
Again, in an office, that was another thing that came to my operational brain is you're changing processes of how the office now operates, and getting that up to speed is going to it's always difficult to change a process and a flow, especially from a third party who doesn't have as much influence on the day-to-day process of the office.
Bingo. Yeah. So offices that are specialized towards implants are going to be easier because they're already set up for this. And it's just like, cool, just don't Oh, you already have financing? Great. And the rest of it's fairly easy. So I think that's where
Right.
we're going to be able to get that in and get it tested and just interject it right into the marketing flow. So it's almost no lift for the office once the change management happens. So that's cool.
Yeah, that's
But
exciting. Well, I'm excited to see how that goes.
that's all I had to cover today. I think this has been a pretty good show today. I felt pretty good about it. I loved your first topic.
Sounds great for sure. I mean, we didn't get too much into the passion and the energy and buzz behind it, but there was definitely some cool data conversations that you can always bank on. Gary and Tanner getting into data
Absolutely.
and processes and stuff.
Stay tuned. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a dentist or multiple dentists come on, and we're going to talk through how this ethical dilemma that we find ourselves in with AI from a clinical standpoint. So it's not just Tanner and I spitting off the top of our domes about it.
Non-clinicians sitting there deciding what the whole industry should be.
Exactly. So stay tuned for that. Tanner, I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, you too, Gary.